All over the world, fertile land is vanishing, swallowed up by the desert. Africa has felt the full force of this. In a century, the Sahara has moved south by 250 kilometers over a front of 6,000 kilometers. The land has become sterile and the population has had to flee.
In the 1950s, there was nothing here like that. The dune was 300 meters off. This land was all cultivated. Now you can see the dune. It's 18 meters high, up to the date palm.
In Morocco and Senegal, a stubborn and decisive struggle is being fought against desertification.
The oases all form an ecological barrier between the Great Desert and the Mediterranean. That makes them of global ecological importance. If this ecosystem is ever destroyed, the desertification will move north and affect all of Europe.
We must win back land from the desert. The objective is to reconquer 817,500 hectares of land. To do that, we decided to build a Great Green Wall, putting in place 1.7 million to 2 million plants every year to retake strips of desert.
The Sahara, immense, extends over the territory of 10 states, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Red Sea. In the north, it reaches the Mediterranean, and in the south, it is bordered by the Sahel, a semi-arid region that then becomes tropical Africa. The Sahara wasn't always inhospitable desert. In the mountain range of Enedi in northern Chad, Yves Gautier, once a research director for the CNRS, is listing the rock art sites that tell of a very different past from today.
Once the Sahara wasn't as arid as we see it to be now. During the Holocene epoch, 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, the climate was much more humid, and some people even talk of a green Sahara. Well, it probably wasn't as green as it is in the tropics. More probably it was a savanna with a lot of animal life, but it certainly wasn't at all like we see it nowadays. Yes, it's a bit of a rough ride, but you see it's worth it once you get up there. There are some fine things.
At the sight of this petrified landscape, it's hard to believe that this was once a verdant Eden, a magnificent savanna with many trees where wildlife was varied and plentiful.
This is one of about 800 shelters I've found in Enedi, and the walls display a message. You see the presence of cattle, which shows these people were herders.
There we can see hunters.
Yes, we can see their bows quite clearly, but what we can add is that while they were animal farmers, they were also always hunters. For their arrows, they seem to have used arrowheads of this type. You see, there are several examples which come mainly from deserts, from different Saharan countries, Mauritania, Libya, Algeria, and sometimes they're found in huge numbers, which shows how important hunting was at the time. They hunted all kinds of animals, including elephants, aurochs, small antelopes, and even birds. This shows that the desert was occupied for thousands of years, practically continually. This is in striking contrast to the present situation, where the Sahara is all but deserted.
If someone had said to the people who lived here just a few thousand years ago, which is as much as to say yesterday, that the region would become a desert of stone and sand, it's a safe bet they wouldn't have believed it. But the desert is there, and it is advancing.
The pens which are around us, like this one, are scattered around a promontory. A likely hypothesis is that the herders settled here at a time when the lake surrounded the promontory like a peninsula. It's an idea which has to be proved, but what we can imagine, and what these pens certainly show, is that the people were herders, but their way of life included fishing. They used the lake as well as the cattle to feed themselves.
The cave paintings show in drawings the daily life led by the people who painted them in red ochre. There are portraits of their game animals, descriptions of their hunts. If Yves Gautier has found fishing scenes, these prove that there were many lakes in this region of the ancient Sahara.
Hassan, you take the right and I'll take the left, okay?
Okay, that'll work.
Hassan! Wow, that's great. One, two small boats and a hippo. Hassan, a bit more to the left. There, that's good. Like that, that's perfect.
In this cave sheltered the fishermen and their small boats drawn on the rock.
It's a little astonishing to find boats in this shelter today, especially when we look around at this totally arid context. 8 to 10,000 years ago, the lake was much larger. You can see here that it came some distance, a few hundred meters from here.
But that's amazing, the size. It was 20 times bigger than it is now.
Here on the iPad, there's a whole series of satellite images which show clearly how Lake Chad has changed since the 1960s, and you can see, as the images progress, how the lake shrinks.
Do you think the lake will just go?
Will it disappear?
Yes.
Well, you see, if the climate continues to get warmer, like we're seeing now, it's very likely that in a decade or two, the lake will have completely vanished.
Do you think Chad will be entirely desert?
Well, unfortunately, we fear that if the climate continues to develop in the way it's doing now, it's very likely the southern part of Chad will become a desert.
Some experts predict that if Lake Chad disappears, the whole region will look like this. 20 million people will have to move into exile. Several thousand kilometers from there, in the northwest, the Great Lakes which feed the oases of southern Morocco are, as well, drying up.
$12.50. Here we're in a basin where one of the Great Lakes is found, and which was once full of water. It was between 3 and 5 meters deep where I'm now sitting. Now it's dry, the main reason being drought and especially evaporation. Meteorological forecasts for this part of Morocco predict an increase in temperatures between 0.6 and 1 degree Celsius. So that rise is an additional pressure upon water resources which are already precarious and in a fragile state.
Desert rains are unpredictable. Not a drop will fall for months, sometimes for several years, and suddenly a deluge will fall for hours.
The lake is now 100% full. That's thanks to the 3 last floods that the lake is full up to this level. But I took a photo before that here. I'll show you it. And the lake was dry.
3 days of torrential rain have refilled the lake.
Do you see where it goes to? It's one of these floods that filled the lake.
In some regions of the Sahara, the rains are so violent that they lead to dramatic events. In December 2014, more rain fell here in a few hours than normally falls in an entire year. The Wadi brutally burst their banks, and more than 30 people were carried away and drowned. It caused hundreds of millions of euros of material damage. Thousands of houses were destroyed, roads were cut, and the electricity network severely damaged. This calamity struck an area where resources are rare. All year long, southern Morocco suffers from chronic thirst, and when the long-awaited rains finally arrive, it's a disaster. This water, which could have been providential, was lost and served no purpose other than to create fresh ravines in a landscape that had already suffered. Over the last few years, a number of rainwater reservoirs have been built to create reserves. 400 kilometers of additional channels have been added to the existing 1,000 kilometers. Recovering all available water and giving it to the population is decisive for the survival of the oases. For some of them, it is already too late. Professor Lassane Kabiri has come to the ruin of the oasis where he grew up.
There were date palms at least 15 meters high. It was all densely green here, with thousands of date palms, women everywhere, and children playing. I'm reminded of things because I was born here. It was my palm grove.
In the recent past, nearly 200 families lived here and harvested dates. The palm trees have died of thirst, life has died out, and the desert has won again. Because they all tried to go it alone, the farmers have dug their own grave.
One of the 200 wells which were dug here in the palm grove and which pumped water, each one for intensive farming. To start with, that worked. There was water, and then it ran out. Here you can see the roots of the date palm which sought out the groundwater. Motorized pumping drained the groundwater, so automatically the date palm will die.
The chain of oases formed a barrier which for a long time stopped the desert. The loss of traditional values of mutual aid combined with a lack of water led to the end of a number of oases. The barrier fell and the desert swept through the breaches. Mohamed Bagwadi, project coordinator for the Southern Oasis program, has made some alarming findings.
How did this happen?
First, there was the drought, then the sand came. You see, the palm trees are dead. They're broken.
And before?
Before, the dates were plentiful. There was water, and we lived well.
How many people were living here?
At the start of the 70s, 100 families. Now there are 4.
Where did they go to?
They went to work at Agadir, the big towns.
You're from here, from Tonzida. Tell me about this school.
In the 90s, there were over 25 students. Now you see there are only 4. In this house, there are still people living. The others are all empty. As you can see, there's practically no one left in the village.
And this house?
No one in that one. The same for that one. They're all gone.
The decline of the southern oases was also caused by the abandonment of ancestral irrigation techniques used in desert areas of North Africa and the Middle East. The first oasis dwellers found their water in the melting snow of the Atlas Mountains by building networks of underground drainage channels called Qattara. Without maintenance, many of these channels blocked up, and now the water from the Atlas Mountains doesn't arrive. Professor Mohamed Madan is actively campaigning for the repair of the irrigation system.
Just where we are here, there's a field of ketera of over 12 kilometers. You can even see it by satellite. These keteras were dug several centuries ago and allowed the irrigation of the palm groves below them.
Most of these underground channels were dug 3 centuries ago. The oldest are over 3,000 years old. If they are regularly cleaned and consolidated where necessary, they still irrigate parcels of land.
These cones are earth which has been pulled out of the underground drainage gallery. This happens during the digging and cleaning of the gallery, and they also allow aeration and sunlight to penetrate during collective work of cleaning and digging.
These earth wells are access points and aeration vents.
The ketera system was abandoned in several places for several reasons, not just the natural effect of drought, but also through human factors like urbanization. There's also intensive pumping, and also young people who no longer wish to work in the ancestral system. As well as that, sand clogged up the catchment zones.
These channels are the underground foundations of the rampart raised against the desert.
The sand has to be cleaned out of the ketera. The stones need to be removed and the aeration wells reopened, which is what we're doing in several villages. We're cleaning out the ketera. Work started 3 days ago.
And it's about how many meters?
In this well, about 18 meters.
Descending over 18 meters in a well that is only 1 meter wide is impressive. Lassen prefers to let Mohamed Madan, who is used to this, lead the way.
Just here, there's only about 20 centimeters of water. But when there's a good flow, the water can get up to here, about the height of a man. Here, if there are floods or rains, the water can rise back to its usual level. This work was done with rudimentary tools. They didn't have dynamite or explosives, just picks and shovels like they did before.
And this goes on for?
It goes on for 3.5 kilometers. The objective of my research is to convince the farmers and the oasis dwellers to maintain this system and get water without attacking nature. It's adapted to the oasis system, adapted to the climate, and adapted to work because it's collective labor which gives the right to irrigation water. Each farmer has water rights. When their rights are due, they open their stream to irrigate their field, and when their right is up, they close the stream so as to pass rights on to the next farmer.
So an oasis is part of an ecosystem, of which the date palm forms the main structure. It plays the role of sunshade in relation to all the other plantations, which it protects during the day from the sun. The other plants capture humidity, which they give up during the night to the date palm.
A date palm produces over 100 tons of vegetation during its life. This material forms humus, which is vital to cultivation. It also produces 25 kilos of dates collected by the women. Sugar-rich fruit, which contain many vitamins and mineral salts. It also offers wood for building and for wickerwork. Finally, it provides a magnificent sunshade in the shade of which all the other plants grow.
This is a field of lucerne, These are red peppers. That's fig. This is parsley, cabbages, carrots, and turnips.
Traditional oases were places for subsistence farming, survival-level farming, which had a role a few decades ago, but nowadays the young people of the South don't easily accept a life with no other perspective than a difficult existence with low income. The rise in popularity of the caper, which had fallen from favor as a condiment, recent interest for argan oil used in cosmetics, the revaluing of Barbary figs or the honey of wild bees, as well as the fashion for organic henna and modern irrigation techniques, open up new perspectives.
In order for people to stay in the oasis, they must develop a market economy. It's not like before, when they work just to survive. Right now, farmers are developing products with added value so as to earn money and to remain here. Otherwise, people will leave the oasis and the desert will move in.
Nowadays, the oases are cultivating a lot of organic henna and irrigating with drip feed systems, which are costly to install but economic to use.
It's true that henna is a plant that uses a lot of water, but we're seeking a compromise between a product which sells well and the available water in the oasis. How are you? Are prices good this year?
They're better. The last 2 years, prices have risen between 50 and 60%.
In spite of its high price, organic henna is more and more sought after. In cosmetics, to make skin beautiful by softening it, for cleaning the skin, dyeing hair, or to decorate hands and feet with temporary tattoos. Oasis dwellers have understood that to survive, they must cultivate acclimatized plants which have a niche market. Convinced by this efficient strategy, coastal oases are developing Barbary fig farming, which is also an attractive product.
Here we're at a place which is worth the journey. It's a 900-meter high mountain with a real ocean of greenery right in the middle of the desert. On the other hand, to get to this, it isn't easy. In the center of the desert, there's less than 100 millimeters of rainfall a year. But there's a forest of greenery here. The cactus captures humidity from the air, which comes from the sea. The sea is 20 kilometers away. Humidity rises and comes here. The cactus has tiny pores which can open, and these allow the cactus to suck in the water.
Today, this unloved plant with a terrible reputation is being rediscovered as a present from nature, and we still don't know everything it can bring us.
With this cactus, you can really do anything, because firstly, it's wood. You can use it to cook with, and it has enormous potential as animal fodder. As for the fruit, there are a lot of interesting things for human nutrition. Jams and nectar can be made, and you can eat the fruit. The cactus is also precious because of its mineral content. There's 60% of omega-6, which has anti-aging properties.
The plantations are multiplying as the virtues of the Barbary fig become known. Because of this cactus, entire areas of previously sterile hills are becoming green.
Is it because of the cactus that all these plants are growing back?
Yes, in this place there was nothing. It was like the hill in front. But when we put the cactus here, the forest regrew. This plant wasn't here before. Now it's everywhere. This is called rhubarb. This beside it is swell, damos, and shuato.
When you plant cactus, as it spreads out, it gives shade to other plants, so they proliferate around it. And when you have plants, you get animal life. A whole chain, a whole ecosystem appears where there was nothing.
Bringing plants to the coastal area of southern Morocco is vital. Immense quantities of sand, thrown up by rivers and streams, are left by the ocean on the shore. This sand, carried by the wind blowing in from offshore, creates the dunes which feed the desert.
There are dunes like this one which have moved 300 kilometers from the coast to the desert over thousands of years.
In the far south of Morocco, the coastal town of Tafaya is at the center of one of the most powerful wind systems of the Sahara. The ocean winds join with the winds of the desert and form giant dunes with bases of more than 800 meters in diameter.
The dunes can be divided into two types. These huge dunes, which are rare and are called megabarkans, which move between 3 and 6 meters every year. And these little dunes, which move 25 to 30 meters a year.
The little dunes, shaped like a crescent moon, can join up and form a chain known as an erg. The migration of sand from the coast to the interior is so strong that the coastal road is often submerged. Traffic has to halt.
You can see that National Route 1 has been covered by sand. That signpost is completely buried. This is the rest of the road, covered by sand.
The coastal road is vital for the south. Every morning, digging machines go back to work at an endless task. Many dwellings at Tafaya have been invaded. Their doors are blocked, their doorframes stuck, the walls themselves attacked. The sand affects all of the town's infrastructure. A few hundred kilometers to the northwest, the town of Mohammed, close to the Algerian border, is trying desperately to survive the onslaught which has already destroyed half of its houses. Like many of his neighbors, Slimane has had to move several times to escape being buried.
There were people here before. The sand buried the houses and they had to move. This is the house where we used to live. This was the room where we slept. This was the kitchen. Through there, the staircase. And this was the way in. This was the front door of the house. The sound has buried everything. There's 2 to 3 meters in these rooms. People try to escape, but the sand catches up.
At Mohammed, the wind is a little less violent than at Tafaya, but it blows more than 300 days every year.
This house may collapse because of the storms. The people are scared, so they're sleeping in a tent. It takes 2 days of storm for the sand to get to here. Just 2 days. The sand wind follows us from down there right up to here. That's what made this wall collapse. The whole village is under threat. These sandstorms will end up by forcing us all to leave.
This is the door of Slimane's last house. How long will he be able to live here?
The sand has followed us here. It invades where we live. It follows us everywhere. The sand has blocked my door. We can't get into our house. We clear it away every day, but the sand has beaten us.
Many places have become ghost towns. A rain of sand falls night and day, stifling all life. The villages drown one by one and the desert advances, inexorably submerging everything. A technique known as palm squares has proved effective. In front of a zone that needs to be protected, fences of palms planted in a square are placed in the direction from which the dominant wind blows. The palms reduce wind speed without causing whirlwinds and stop the sand, which is carried to ground level, falls, and then gathers there before reaching the protected zone.
The sand advances 19 meters every year. Against this invasion, there are two methods which work here. We fight using palm squares with the leaves of date palms, but these squares can only resist for 10 years. Besides that, we try to plant tamaris using ceramic pots, because the pot retains humidity, and so the cuttings can grow to form a large tree, which will stop the sand. Like that, we are making a green belt, which will resist longer.
Maintaining the palm squares needs a lot of labor, and when returns from agriculture are small, the oasis dwellers give up. At the Architectural School of Rabat, architect Carlos Perez Martin is looking for an alternative.
Here we've tried everything to hold back the sand, whether it be corrugated panels, wooden stakes with nets, palms, even earth walls. We've seen that the solutions offered by agricultural engineers don't work.
Up till now, the sand has overcome every obstacle placed in its way. But Carlos Perez Martin hasn't given up.
The objective is to establish a system with barricades placed on the terrain with a rounded form so as to adapt to the shape of the dunes on a giant scale. This giant scale will also allow us to put apartments inside. Since the dunes rise to 7 or 8 meters, we'll need 3-story buildings with very narrow alleys and small patios. This is just to protect against the heat.
Like everywhere else, industrially produced breeze blocks, easy and quick to put in place, have replaced traditional construction techniques. The architect's idea is to build in a way inspired by the old buildings by using earth. To benefit from the shade of the palm trees, the dwellings should be put back in the heart of the palm grove as they once were.
This kind of urbanization is nothing new. It's the traditional way of living in a palm grove. Living inside is always more pleasant than living outside, where the palms provide no protection.
A field of small barken dunes, very like those which threaten the oases, offers an ideal site to test under real conditions.
We're trying one of the reduced barriers with a rounded earth wall so that we can see how the dune behaves. This allows us to study whether the dune will really stop or move off to one side. And finally, if we could construct living spaces inside it. Our architect, Magnus Larsen, proposed working with bacteria to solidify the grains of sand. Once they're solidified, we can start to work from an architectural point of view so that we can make a living space for people.
At Tafaya, the local authorities have launched a last chance program.
كما ترون فإن تحط على المدينة طرفايا.
Here at Tafaya, 800,000 tons of sand come from the ocean and fall on the town every year. You see here the wall which was built to stop the sand. It needs to be 6 meters high. Before this wall was here, the sand caused health and breathing problems for the population.
هناك الرمال تمر فوق الحائط وتسبب في أمراض صحية كمشاكل التنفس.
To stabilize the sand, we use plants which adapt well to the climate here.
And what plants are you using?
90% are tarfa.
155,000 hectares have already been planted. The tarfa must survive winds of over 50 kilometers.
Can you give me an idea of how old these trees are?
These trees are about 3 years old and they'll grow to 2.5 meters high. Thanks to this, we've managed to reduce sand encroachment of the town infrastructure by 80%.
The project is to double plantation surface every 2 years, but the cost is so high as to be out of reach for the very poor southern oases. Does this mean giving up before the desert? The Pan-African Great Green Wall project to stop drying up of the Sahel was launched in 2005. It meant to reforest a 15-kilometer wide band from Djibouti in the north of Senegal over a length of 7,600 kilometers. Up until now, only Senegal has really committed itself to this huge project. The Sahel zone is an intensive mobile grazing territory for vast herds of cattle, sheep and goats. In the dry season, the animals graze the little grass that subsists. While waiting for regrowth in the rainy season, which only lasts 2 months, the soil, completely bare, has no protection.
Well, here you are. The seasonal problem. A month ago, everything was dry. No grass, the ground was cracked and very dry. One night of rain, and the way is blocked, the road's blocked. A paradox of desert areas.
The violence of the rainstorms might fool us. But in fact, the amount of rain that falls annually is low, sometimes very low. The rain falls on hot ground, which increases evaporation. Finally, like in South Morocco, the rainfall is very irregular. In some villages, large reservoirs have been built to recover the rainwater. In the dry season, these are supplied by wells which reach the groundwater, but there are far from enough of these.
Today there's only one cart, but a few months ago there were 40 or so come to get water to supply all the villages. It's always a great surprise after 6 months of recording, and then there's the result, a radical change in the landscape and the environment. 6 months of a totally desert environment, and then after the rain of these last few days, the landscape becomes completely verdant.
The rainy season is the only time during which the Great Green Wall can be extended.
These are plants that don't get watered. They have to be planted when it's wet because when it's dry, it's too late. And we've a lot of area to cover. In a month, we should have finished planting the area.
These young trees, very tender, are delicacies for the herds, and all the animals want to eat them.
This barbed wire is to protect the plantations. We're in a grazing zone where there are thousands of head of cattle. Without the fencing, they'd graze on anything that was planted. It's an area where there are only herders, practically no farmers. These are herders who are becoming more and more sedentary. Half of them live all around the parcels of land. It's them that keep watch over the land, because they know they'll need grass in the dry season. When grass becomes rare, there's only these parcels of land where you can find something for the animals. The zone was relatively arid with advanced deforestation. When you think what it was like 5 years ago when we started up, and you look at it now and see what it's become, it's relatively encouraging. We have to plant a distance of 545 kilometers. That 545 kilometers won't just be one plant after another. We'll plant them in groves. This is Acacia nilotica. We've planted all kinds of acacia this year. 1.72 million plants. That's enormous.
Here we are in one of the oldest plantations making up the Great Green Wall. After 8 years, we have plantations of this type of tree, which is particularly adapted to drought conditions. These trees were also chosen because they're used by the local population. For example, Acacia Senegal, which makes acacia gum, which is used in pharmaceuticals, as well as other trees like the balanites, which the local people use for medicine or food. These properties make the local populations conserve the plantations in the long term.
Overall, the herders have respected the enclosures, even if, here and there, starving cattle have made a few holes in the fence. Traditional burn-offs to encourage regrowth have been forbidden. A firebreak has been made around each parcel. Thus protected, the ecosystem is reborn. Migrating birds return in masses, particularly in the rainy season. About 20% of the trees planted don't grow, but that's an acceptable percentage in an arid region. The Great Green Wall Agency has 7 nurseries where thousands of trees await planting. However, scientists would like to improve the resistance of the young plants. They're betting upon recent experiments which have already worked in laboratories.
Here are the acacias which are due to be planted on the site of the Great Green Wall. To help them to grow and adapt to a relatively hostile environment in a few months, where they won't get a drop of water for 10 months, we're giving them a partner. It's a mushroom which will help them to resist these adverse conditions for the 10 months to come.
The mushroom that we eat is only the visible part. Its filaments develop under the ground over very large areas.
The mushroom, as it develops, will establish a sort of web in the soil which allows a liaison and interactions between different plants. Trees and herbaceous plants are more easily able to exchange nutriments between different sorts of plants. Right now, however, the use of the mushroom is limited to a few parcels of land. And in the short term, our objective is to produce enough of these mushrooms industrially to use them on a large scale over large sections of the Great Green Wall. Right, we're going to take the plants from these 2 lots treated with the mushrooms.
Preliminary tests have shown that plant-mushroom symbiosis multiplies the survival rate of young trees by 4. Now the experiments are facing the challenge of the field. A lot of herders have settled in the areas around the Great Green Wall. Forest rangers work with them to recruit the labor force they occasionally need and to collect information, especially about what they feel.
This project started here 8 years ago. Do you find things are positive or negative?
What I want to pass on is that I'm just looking to work. But when this project offers work for several months and you leave behind your sheep and goats and donkeys, you work hard, and at the end of the month you're not paid, and then this goes on for 5 or 6 months. Is there any point in working?
If you say you haven't been paid, it's because the money isn't in the treasury. Other people and other projects have used it. But when the money comes in, you'll be paid.
In spite of recurrent funding problems which have upset payments of promised wages, the herders have become more sedentary over the last few years. Those who are nomadic come back to the country in the rainy season. Herding products are still an essential part of local resources. At the market of Widu, held every Tuesday, goats, sheep and cattle are sold. While the Great Green Wall has been built to hold back the sand, the intention is also to fight against poverty and diversify revenue sources for the local population. The creation of gardens helps.
These spaces are reserved for women who use them for market gardening and horticulture. They gain revenue from that, and that diversifies work. Already they say it's changing food habits. It's not like before. In some areas, because they're nomadic, the children can't attend school. When we started to act here, people started to settle down. And the school which was here reopened because the young people who once moved the animals for grazing stayed here.
The Great Green Wall. Show me what's good and what's not good. Okay, children, what isn't good?
Desert. Fire.
No water.
Those working on the Great Green Wall are not limiting themselves to restoring the ecosystem, they're also taking care of people.
This is not just an ecological project. The Great Green Wall will have an impact in transforming the environment, which will have an effect on health. For example, in providing a much more diverse and rich food supply that is much better for today's population. And on the other hand, with the water that will come along with the wall, we could have infectious diseases developing.
The observatory, run by anthropologist Gilles Butch, records changes, anticipates problems, and measures the efficiency of health and sanitation action in the field.
In this notebook, we have the figures over 3 years of the frequency of malaria. We can see a very big fall, thanks to the release of impregnated mosquitoes. Senegal is absolutely exemplary, since it's managed to link the agency which plants the trees and the scientists which monitor all the modifications which come with that. Perhaps it's a shame that Senegal is the only pioneer, and the others have difficulty following this example. But it has to be said that the Sahel is a war zone, and I think that starting from Senegal, we will convince the others to build this Great Green Wall.
We're not yet in the desert. We're at the edge, in the Sahel. We have to ensure that desertification doesn't come to the lands of the Sahel. And that's the fight we're in. There are no utopias. When the whole population of an area are on the move, we have to try something to keep them in place. And that's the challenge.
The Oases program in Morocco and the Great Green Wall of Senegal show that the retreat of fertile land can be stopped. It's not just a question of reconquering lost ground, but fighting to ensure that reconquered desert land is viable. This fight is everyone's business. If it is lost, millions of climate refugees will swell the desperate crowds beating on the doors of Europe.